one, thank you guys all for the feedback you guys have been providing and the different questions you've been asking. It's been really helpful to get your feedback and figure out where we need to improve and all of that. So yeah, thank you guys for staying with it. So one piece of feedback that we received and what we're going to focus on today is how do you present a flow? So we're not going to focus on how do you build a flow, but instead, like, okay, you've built one now what? How do you present it both through Flow TriCast, similar to how I just showed you on Zoom? In addition, how do you record an AR video? How do you do a screen capture on your phone or on another device so that you can present this elsewhere? So all of those different sort of presentation modalities is what we're going to focus on today. And that way you guys feel empowered to present them, because you could basically take any of the example flows we have out there and use them and present them today and practice with those. And I think that helps codify somewhat of the build process, because if you understand sort of what you can do on the presentation side, then it might help change, or it might change some of the things you want to do on the build side in terms of how you create the flow and how you tell the story. So that's the plan for today. And to do that, we're going to break up into two groups. One is
Michael?
Jason's. Yep.
Before we do that, I want to show one aspect of the timeline to everybody, things that have been fixed if people have been playing with the timeline. So I'm just gonna spend maybe 1 minute on this. So this is the timeline is, the new big change in the flow editor. And there were some interactions that were a little flaky in the last version. So I just want to be clear that we definitely will add some sort of instructional material on how to interact with the timeline, because it's so important. But essentially, right, every time you click on an item in the timeline, you'll see it appear on the right-hand side. You've selected that. We have added some things like this white line, so it's more clear what you currently have selected. If what you're working with in the timeline is currently highlighted, say I click here, analysis pops up, I can drag it around in space, right, at this point, but also in the timeline, if I double click, I've just made it invisible for that step, and I can double click it again and make it visible. I can also click and drag an item so that I've just made that word analysis be visible in these other steps. So there's, in a way, it's really straightforward, but if you don't know that you can double click, if you don't know that each one of these dots, each one of these boxes is actually interactive, even if it's not currently visible, now you'll understand a little bit how to use the timeline, hopefully. Do you have any questions on that or comments?
I was going to say, maybe just show the search and the animate between steps button. So they.
Okay, so for the search, say you have, this is a pretty big flow. It's not the hugest, but it's got a fair number of things. Maybe you just want to, hey, I just want to get to disease spread. As soon as you start typing, it will filter down to just the aspects of it, just the objects that you care about. You also can collapse these guys. If you know you're dealing with text at the moment, you can collapse those. But for example, I've got the word data stories. I want to interact with that. There it is. Of course, you can also just click on it directly in the view, but that clicking on it directly in the view is specific to text. There is no way to click directly on the view for Swarm, because where would you click? A click has a different interaction. So, yep. Was that what you wanted me to show there with the search objects, Michael?
Yep. Yeah, and then you had mentioned being able to move objects, so just understanding that you need to make sure there's one thing checked before you move them.
Oh, okay. So say I want. Right now, the text object data stories is in a certain place. If I move it around here, the key thing he's talking about is this animate between steps. So if animate between steps is checked and I move this somewhere, maybe, yeah, I can push it back into space a little bit. When I go, let's go look at that. I'm just dragging to make it visible. You see that that object has, it's a little hard to tell because it's mixed in with other objects. Okay, this isn't the best way to demo this. But you see data stories is animating between step to step. That's because animate between steps is checked. If I uncheck that and then I move it around, now it will always stay in that place across the entire flow. So in a way, that's a really subtle checkbox, but it really helps you determine when you move something, are you moving it just for this step, or are you animating, or are you moving it for the entire flow? Hopefully that was clear enough, Michael.
No, great. Cool. Yeah, thanks for covering that. I find that to be one of the most important buttons that if you don't know it's there and you're moving things around and you think you're updating the steps, and then you go back and you realize you've changed, a bunch of other steps. So just something to be cognizant of. Cool. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to break out into two different sections here pretty quickly. And it's not going to be based on experience levels, but instead we're just going to sort of split the group. Half of you guys are going to go with Jason, and then half are going to stay with me. Those that are going with Jason are going to cover flow tricasting, which is essentially how we present in Zoom and all these other meetings where you can see the person's face and you can see the content behind us. So that's the flow tricasting. He has software and all of those instructions that he'll go through. And then I'm going to focus on the presentation layer for mobile and mobile AR, how you record yourself in AR and all the different things you need to do to get that successful. And that way, you guys all then have the power to basically, practice with any of the flows that exist to present and to learn how they sort of work and the interactions. And that can help define some of your builds.